Howdy, and welcome to another episode of Adult Onset Horsemanship. I'm your host, Daniel Dolphin.
I'm ready.
Well, I have a little intro that plays before it, and then I'll just go to introduce you. And I gotta say, like, I have people, you go to their website to get their bio and stuff, and I mean, they got like 8 pages of it. You know, they won the spelling bee in the 3rd grade and all this kind of stuff, and like, you're just simple and easy, and I appreciate that.
I didn't win any spelling bees, and you know, it's not about me anyway. So you know, that's the thing. I mean, it's my name on it, and everything, but it's about what we do with the force. So you know,
yes, sir.
That's kind of the way I look at it.
Absolutely, that makes you genuine. You're not an egotistical, narcissistic driven sort of.
I'm the most genuine, humble person I know.
Your humility is legendary, Jim.
Yeah, my humility is like I'm more humble than anybody.
I got it. I'm gonna have to use that as a teaser.
Yeah, the only thing you're probably gonna have to edit out is if I go off color on anything or off, you know what I mean.
So no, this is called Adult Onset Horsemanship.
Oh, yeah,
so it's all. Right. I'm not expecting that 8-year-olds are listening to this or anything. So all of that is on the table. Okay. We've had F-bombs dropped, and okay. I definitely have been off color a few times.
I can see that.
No worries. Yeah. All right. Well, our guest today is Mr. Jim Masterson of the Masterson Method. I have heard of Jim for decades and finally had the pleasure of meeting him at the Best Horse Practices Summit this past October in Lexington, Kentucky, where we were both presenters. Jim, how are you doing this morning? Thank you for joining me from way up in the white north.
Oh, I'm fine. Sorry, I just stuffed a cinnamon roll in my mouth when you started.
Not a problem. I was trying to stretch the intro a little bit longer to let you chew there,
so I could get it down. Okay.
Well, we start off every podcast with the lightning round questions to break the ice. Some people get a little nervous. I don't think that's going to be an issue for you, but these are still always a little bit of fun. So, If you were a Jedi, what % chance would there be that you would use the Force inappropriately?
I'm going to have to think about that one. I mean, the options are like endless. The possibilities, but probably very little chance.
Think so? Okay. I would never walk across the room for a cup of coffee anymore. That thing would float right to me every time. I have to say.
Oh, well, that's not misusing it.
Well, okay, yeah, I wouldn't slaughter younglings or anything like that.
Yeah.
Anyway. Morning or evening?
Oh, evening.
Bay or sorrel?
Well, sorrel, since I have 3 of them.
Okay.
You know, I used to think, I'll elaborate a little bit. I used to think sorrels or chestnuts were like the most boring color. And then I ended up with 2 sorrel Morgans that were given to me, and they are the best horses ever. So I can't, that's a little biased. I'm a little biased there.
Yes. I don't have a whole lot of color bias except for Palominos. I'm not a Palomino fan. I have ridden an inordinate number of Palominos that were dumb as a post. And that is not always true. I've got a Palomino right now that I like quite a bit, but just for whatever reason, that'd be my least favorite color. But does pineapple belong on pizza?
No. Okay. I would use my Jedi power to eliminate that.
Do you have a preferred way to teach, a preferred medium? So you have some videos, you have books, you do clinics, or I don't know, what do you call them, instructional weekends or whatever?
Yeah, we call them weekend seminar workshops, but just hands-on is the best way to teach. And so, you know, and everybody learns differently, but, you know, some people learn, as you know, they like to read. Some people prefer videos. You know, I prefer to teach hands-on, but then the video would be the next best thing because you can actually, you know, show what's going on.
Yes, sir. A lot of these, I have two questions that I can ask. And since you're in the midst of writing a book right now, are you a fan or not a fan of the Oxford comma,
The Oxford comp.
where you where you put it
Oh,
in front of
comma. Oh, I don't like a lot of commas.
okay. I'm very liberal with my commas. I probably
Yeah.
overuse them a little bit.
I used to be liberal with them, and then I realized I have to stop and think, well, does this need a comma or does it not need a comma? And I ended up, spending a lot of time thinking about it. So now I just use the minimum of commas. But then if it goes to an editor, they might add some back in where they belong.
Yes, sir. Well, in my speech, I pause a lot. And I think that's why, because the commas are pauses in that. So I write the way I talk somewhat.
Hmm.
If you could have any superpower, what superpower would you choose?
Oh, let's see. Oh, well, I would think time travel.
Okay.
Is that a superpower?
Yes, sir. I would say so.
Because that would be fun, just interesting because I like history, but also if I am really pressured by something, I could just skip it. Or if I made a mistake, I could go back and do it over again.
So I'm going to get a little into my physics world right now, but time
Okay.
travel is actually possible and happens all the time right now. That's what Einstein's theory of relativity is that time is not the linear construct that we believe it to be. So for instance, you could be on a phone call live with someone in Australia, and you are simultaneously talking to them at the same time and at two different times.
Uh-huh. And
So,
also like quantum physics, right?
yes,
Is
sir.
a little bit. So maybe it's just being aware of it. And then it's not,
Yeah,
we might
consciousness
have the
is
superpower.
absolutely, consciousness is one of the big debates going on in physics and that kind of stuff right now. Also, black holes can interrupt time and so forth. So
Yeah.
you think about light years.
Yeah, I found it interesting, when somebody was talking about quantum physics once, that they're able to observe the smallest, tiniest particle. I don't even know what it's called when it pops up in a whatever, and just when you observe it, it changes, it moves, it disappears. Like
Yes, sir.
the just the act of observing this particle
Has an
change it,
effect on it.
it has an effect on it. So and it pops up somewhere else. So that's pretty
Absolutely.
interesting.
It's kind of not the kind of stuff you want to think of right before you try to go to bed, for sure. Um, thoughts or feelings?
Oh, I don't know. Do I have to like answer without thinking? Because when you said it right away, thoughts came into my head. But I think thinking's overrated. So,
Well,
yeah.
so you're saying you feel like thinking is overrated, and you're not sure whether you're a
Oh,
thinker or a feeler. Okay,
is that a quantum question?
I think there's a little loop there for sure. I believe.
Yeah, thoughts or feelings. I would say a balance. There's got to be a balance. Sorry.
Uh, I never do this on purpose, but this question always falls in exactly the wrong place.
Okay.
Are you decisive or indecisive?
Oh, I'm pretty indecisive. That's my comfort zone.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you an interesting thing. The people that are indecisive always take a long time to answer, far and away. I mean, by like 30 seconds, you're the fastest answer of being indecisive that I have gotten yet.
I'm the fastest indecisive person you know.
Yeah, the decisive people always say, I'm decisive, right? I mean, like 2 seconds. And people don't know because I edit out the pauses and stuff, but the indecisive people might take 5 minutes to tell me they're indecisive, which I find hilarious. But you didn't. You, sir, are an oxymoron walking around. How about that?
I've been called a lot of things, but never oxy.
Oh, well, this might not apply to you, but do you have a favorite piece of tack or tool that is horse related? So for like, I'm generally asking that like you've got this bit that was given to you by so and so or whatever, but I guess your particular job doesn't really require any tools. So do you have a favorite tool
Well,
or piece of
for
tack?
what we do with horses is just our hands, and our eyes, and then. But when I'm riding, or I have two Morgans that I drive, I just like the least possible as far as, but I don't ask a lot of them. So I have a rope hackamore. It's one of those side pull rope hackamores that I got a long time ago at from a pile of used tack. And I whenever I ride in that. And the last few years I've driven in it too, because my horses are so, they respond to it. But also my mare had learned to just kind of grab the bit and go. And then if I'm driving about two of them, she's kind of she braces against the bit a lot. So when you're driving two horses, it's tricky
Yes.
to get one to yield a little bit and get that balance going. But I always rode her in the rope hackamore. So when I drive them now, I put the rope hackamore on, and she yields to that much easier. And I don't worry about them running off with me. Her brother, the gelding, he might panic, but he panics in place. He doesn't leave you behind. So for riding or driving, I prefer the least possible.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So do y'all actually get to do sleigh rides and that kind of stuff? Or I'm assuming there's a lot of snow up there where you are. Or...
Yeah, in Iowa, some winters we get a lot of snow. Some winters we don't get a lot of snow, but they're all pretty miserable, the windy and gray. But we do have some nice clear days, and when the snow is just right, because there's 80 acres around us that's not farmed in the winter, and so I can just hook them up at the barn here at my barn, and just go from there and sleigh. And I have a little kind of just it's not a fancy sleigh, so I haven't in a couple of years. I think the last time I sleighed, I actually did a video. It's on Facebook, and I did a kind of fun little video where I was harnessing them up, and it was in fast motion, like little, those old 20s films. And then when I hooked them up and I went out sleighing, I had my nephew with his drone, and it goes from high speed, frantic, getting them all ready, to a really nice aerial views of sleighing around the field. And it's on my Facebook page. We have a Masterson Method Facebook page, and I think it might be on there, but the Jim Masterson Facebook page, I have it on there. You might have to look for it, but it's really nice. I mean, the snow has to be just right. It can't be too deep. It can't be too hard and icy. The snow has to be the right condition to go sleighing. Otherwise, it's hard on the horses and no fun.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Let's see, we don't really have a winter like that down here in Louisiana. We kind of have mud. We don't really get anything frozen hardly ever. So it's just mud and rain all winter. And let me tell you something. If it is 45 degrees with a 10-mile-an-hour wind and 90% humidity, you cannot put enough clothes on to get warm. You would think it's not that cold, but the humidity just goes right through anything you could put on. It can be pretty
the humidity up here, because it's humid in Iowa in the summer, and then when it gets cold enough, the air is drier. But when it's in that in-between range that you just described, it's really, really cold. And the horses can be out at 10 below or 20 even, and the sun's shining and their coats all puffed up, and they don't need blankets. But it's been like rainy and windy and 40, and they're shivering. 40 above, they're shivering.
Do you have a favorite book or movie?
Yeah, I have a few favorite. Do I have to pick one?
No, you can tell us three if you want, whatever comes to mind.
Well, the movie that changed my life was Animal House, with John Belushi.
Senator Bluto, yes, sir, absolutely.
Yeah, it changed my life. So, but I like, I like adventure movies. Like, there's a movie, The Man Who Would Be King, with Sean Connery and Michael Caine. It's a Rudyard Kipling story in India. It's really a neat adventure story. And the Indiana Jones movies, I like those. And then One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest was always a favorite of mine with Jack Nicholson. And then the other, if I were to just pick one, it would be Casablanca with Humphrey Bogart. Yeah. That wasn't very decisive, was it?
No, it's fine though. It gives everybody a snapshot of your personality, which is, I would say your answers maybe age you more than any other guest I've ever had as well. One of the questions I have that I alternate with is like, what year did music end for you? And apparently for you, music or movies ended in 1978.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's right. Now that you mention it, yeah. So there's none that pop to mind that are newer than that.
Well,
Now that you mention it, so
that's fine. Do you have a guilty pleasure?
well, I like to drink beer and wine a lot.
Okay.
Is that guilty enough?
No, that's fine. Yeah, I wouldn't even consider that. That's South Louisiana. That's just
Oh
normal.
yeah, right.
So, and what is your favorite dinosaur or deep sea creature?
Oh, probably a whale.
Okay. Any particular whale? Blue whale, sperm whale, orcas, anything, or
No, doesn't matter.
just in
Yeah,
general?
whales.
Okay.
Yeah, they're pretty cool. I mean, they're really slow and deliberate, and they float through the air and in the water. So
Mhm.
yeah,
It's kind of amazing how like gracefully something that big can move, isn't it? It really is.
yeah.
And have you ever had a UFO encounter?
No, but I thought I did once.
Okay.
So we live out of town, like a mile from the center of town. So we're just outside the city limits. It's a small town, and it's all corn and soybeans around here. And my buddy across the street, he owns a grain elevator, and this is probably 10 years ago or more. We were out one evening drinking beer, and we were in his truck, and he came back and dropped me off at my house. It was probably 2 a.m. And we're sitting in the truck, and I'm, getting ready to get out of the truck. And we both see this thing go streaking on fire across the sky. And we thought something had crashed into the cornfield probably a mile away. That's how big it was. And our first thoughts were, alien something. So we drove all back through the cornfields and through these dirt roads looking for this thing. And the next day I saw a news thing, and it was a meteor up in Wisconsin, which is probably 250 miles away, had entered the atmosphere, and it broke up. And there were some parts that hit, landed, but it was 250 miles away. But we thought it had just gone, and it was spooky because we're driving around through the cornfields, these roads between the cornfields, like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, looking for something that had crashed there, and it was that feeling of Close Encounters of the Third Kind. But anyways, that was my closest encounter with the UFO. It was unidentified flying object for about 24 hours.
Yes, sir.
Oh, but the thing was that on the YouTube, there was a police car had stopped somebody, and they caught it on their camera, their dash camera, this up in Wisconsin, flying down.
Well, that is pretty cool.
All I can say, it was just good that they had stopped somebody else rather than us.
Well, and we're just taking the government's word that was a meteor. It could have actually been a spaceship shot down, right? So, I mean, you know how they lie, right?
Yeah.
So, anyway.
Now you got me thinking. I hate thinking.
That's all right. Well, that is the end. And you have the highest score. I don't know if I told you this was for points, but you have got 612 points. That's the highest score anybody has ever made before. And that
what's the scoring based on?
It's totally arbitrary.
Okay.
And that entitles you to either an awkward silence or a genuine compliment. So your choice there.
Am I supposed to compliment you?
No,
me,
or
your
compliment you. Yes, sir.
Oh, awkward silence. That's
it's always my favorite.
Let's just have a cup of coffee, sip of coffee here to break the awkward silence.
I love when people choose the awkward silence. I'm getting more and more of those. Maybe it's my knack of picking guests that now people are choosing the awkward silence, but I like it. So you are Jim Masterson of the Masterson Method, body worker type stuff, and a reasonably revolutionary set of techniques and all. Would you kind of give us the 30,000-foot view of what it is that you do?
So that means like the quick version, right?
The 30,000 just the basic outline.
Yeah, because when I started to teach this, and I did the first book, and I knew I was going to want to teach it because it's very interactive with with the horse, and it's about relationship, which everybody wants, whether your relationship is competitive or just on a more intimate level. But anyways, so my wife said I had to come up with a 15-second elevator speech. What is it? So I'm prepared for this one. It's a method of equine bodywork where you learn to read and follow the responses of the horse to your touch, to release tension in key junctions of the body that most affect performance.
I like it.
That's the
That is
15-second elevator
succinct.
speech.
And you do that. You've got books, videos, you do worldwide tours. I mean, you're basically the body working rock star. So for like a business model, I know you've got instructors and stuff now. What's the basic structure of that?
I kind of discovered this learning how to read what the horse is telling you while you're working on it when I was grooming hunter jumpers on the show circuit. And I started experimenting with it, and actually it works. I mean, it's effective if you can get the horse's nervous system to release tension without mechanically doing it. Like massage is good. All these other modalities are good, but with this, you're following subtle changes in the horse's behavior, and he's telling you where he's holding tension and when he releases it. So his nervous system is part of the process. It's very interactive, and I knew that people were going to want to start learning it. So I just early on, I kind of, that was my goal, to start teaching this, and as well as working on horses, So I worked on hunter jumpers on the show circuit for 9 years, and like a huge education, because I probably worked on 600 or 700 horses a year, and you just learn a ton, and I was able to refine the techniques. So I knew right away that I was going to be teaching it at some point. And so the first thing my wife and I did is we made an instructional video. Once I had a set of techniques that were like basic key techniques that I used on the horse that were teachable. And the other thing about this is it's very teachable. You don't have to know, to start this, you don't have to know any anatomy. You just have to know where the head is, because you're going to start there, or where you're going to end at the tail. And so I was able to make an instructional video that was something that was easy to learn. Any horse owner could start to learn these techniques and get results right away, because it's about results. You can't, when you're working on show horses, if you're not getting results, they don't call you back. It doesn't matter how much anatomy you know or whatever. So it's teachable, and it's learnable, and it's interactive. So that was my kind of direction I was going to go. So I started teaching seminars myself early on while I was working on horses. And then when it got busier, and we had to do a website, it was almost like there was no plan. Other than that, there was no other plan. So you have to have a website nowadays, because you expand your business in the bodywork business by word of mouth. If you put your card up or a brochure up at the feed store or something, most people they don't know you. They're not going to hire you to come work on their horses. Word of mouth. So social media is word of mouth on a large scale. So we did a website, and we kind of did it ourselves. And then when I got busier, first what happened is we did the weekend seminar. Then people wanted more, so I put together a 5-day advanced course. It's 5 days of working on like tons of horses during the week. And then a lot of equine massage therapists would come to those to learn some new techniques. And then they said, do you have a certification program? And I thought, no, but I guess I can make one, So we put together a certification program where there's field work and case studies and stuff. And then when I trained enough certified practitioners, I was able to choose the ones that I thought would be really good teachers that taught the most like I do, it has to be like you can't work with the horse one way and then turn around and work with people another way. Like you can't be gentle and soft with the horse and then turn around and yell at the students. So I needed instructors that would teach the way I would teach and the way they would work with the horse. So I hired some instructors to teach the weekends, and then it just grew from there. And eventually, I would just do the advanced courses and the final certification. And then eventually we got so busy that I trained advanced instructors. And so eventually it just led to where I am sitting here at this desk. So I have an office job now. And I only get out to work on horses if I go out and do horse expos or do like joint clinics, with like Mark Rashid. And I'm going to do one with Josh Nickel in Canada next October. But so then I get out to work on horses. But for the most part, it's just grown into this job. But I guess the answer to your question is the business model just kind of developed as we went along. And the way I look at it is like a door opens, if it looks like a good thing, you go in, you go through it. And if it doesn't work out, then you sneak out, back up out the door and do something else. So and it just kind of grew like that, and and get out there and do horse expos, and I had to start with the small ones, and then was able to get into bigger ones. So that's how it works. So now we have our books and DVDs, and then we have weekend seminar workshops, and we have 5-day advanced course, and then we have a certification program for people that want to get certified. And also during COVID, we did some online stuff, some online courses. So that's the basic structure of it.
Very cool.
That was the short answer. You want the
yes.
long answer?
No, that's fine. So you didn't start with a megalomaniacal plan to take over the world through this or anything like that. It just kind of organically grew, and that's beautiful. I like that.
Well, my goal, I wanted a lot of people to learn this because it's really connects you with the horse, and anybody can learn to do it. I mean, to become certified, you have to, get really good at it, but anybody can learn how to do this. It's so easy to do. The bladder meridian technique that we start with, it's on our website, a 15-minute video on how to do it, because it's so simple and easy for people to do. And I can't tell you how many emails, literally, I can't tell you. If I counted them, I could. People that said they just watched the bladder meridian on a video or on our website, and they went out and did it with their horse, and it just changed their horse because they had a horse that was like locked up. Something had happened in the past, either physical, it had an incident or an accident, or maybe it was abuse, or maybe it was something else, but they're just froze up inside, and the bladder meridian just gets their nervous system to let go and relax and release that tension, and then they have a changed horse. So what's not to like about that?
Yes, sir. I really think that's, like, I got to watch you work that horse at the Best Horse Practices Summit, and it was a little black mare, and she's a little nervous and walking around, looking around and all of that stuff. And after you've done a few releases with her, 5 minutes in, basically you have the lead rope on the ground and she's just standing there waiting on you to do the next thing. I mean, I always feel like horse people, they ask questions like, how do I develop trust in my horse, and how do I connect with my horse? I've never viewed those things as actual goals. I think they're more byproducts. You connect with your horse by doing all these other things that have kind of proven that you're trustworthy, and they start to trust you that way. But there's not like a trust fall exercise with a horse.
You're right. It's what you're doing with the horse that builds the trust. It's not, doing things to make the horse trust you. That's correct.
But like this method that you have is just phenomenal at getting the horse to connect with you and start to, I'm always looking at things from a behavioral perspective. And if I would view what you're doing kind of as classical conditioning, you're sort of giving the horse a good taste in their mouth with your presence. Basically, they're going to look forward to you in a positive, I don't ever like to use positive and negative. You're going to have a pleasant sort of aura about you for the horse because you're bringing good sensations to them. So they're going to start to look forward to your presence.
And that just happens organically. And it's like you said, you can't like build trust with the horse. There's not like trust building exercises. There are things that make the horse feel comfortable, like you just said, and you're there and you're part of it. But another thing, when you get the horse to release tension on its own, either with the really light touch techniques where you don't do anything, you just follow the response of the horse, or with the movement techniques where you ask for, like, you release tension in the scapula by asking them to let the leg go. When that happens, their nervous system releases neurochemicals. And I used to call them endorphins because it was obvious. I did a scapular release, especially scapular releases. Some horses, they'll just drop their head and start yawning, and then they're out. They're standing there, like you said, with the lead rope on the ground because something's released in their nervous system. And then Dr. Peters, the Your Horse's Brain author, I asked him because I asked him what chemicals were releasing because he said he didn't think they were endorphins, but he said they were serotonin and opioid something or other there, but there's some chemical that releases that just relaxes the horse and builds, and that actually some of those chemicals are actual trust building chemicals, it turns out, in the horse, that chemicals that the horses that are associated with bonding in the herds.
That's probably oxytocin. Yes,
oxytocin.
We call it the cuddle hormone.
So it was oxytocin,
skin on skin contact. So when you hold hands with your wife walking through the mall, that's part of you're releasing oxytocin to one
Oh,
another.
you are? Okay, yeah. And then when you get out the credit card, she drags you by the hand into a shop. And when you get out the credit card, that's releasing
That's the
something.
other reason. So you can start to walk faster and keep her from making that right turn into the store.
Yeah.
What would you mind? I know you've probably answered this question 1,000 times, but I feel like you have a pretty unique story as to how this all started for you, because it wasn't something you were seeking out. It was kind of just lightning struck. So tell us that.
Yeah, I was never interested in equine body work or any kind of body work. A horse was a horse to me, you know, but when I was here in Fairfield, Iowa, and I was between jobs, and this was in 1997, I think, and or 98. And I had a little money, so I didn't feel like pressured to get any work. But my wife eventually kind of got tired of chasing me off the couch, you know, in the morning, and said, there's a barn in town, a hunter jumper barn, and the trainer's looking for a groom, somebody to haul the horses to the shows and groom at the shows. She had grooms here at home. And so I took that job. And I just noticed when we'd started out in Iowa here, like, where are we? Mason City up in northern Iowa, then down to Columbia, Missouri, and then started branching out as her riders got better and their families a couple families could afford it. They started buying more expensive horses and branching out to Lexington and to Lake Placid, and then eventually down to Wellington, to Ocala, the show there, the hit show in the winter, and then the Wellington show, which is pretty high level. And so these were really nice horses, and they're performance horses, and the trainers, they would hire massage therapists and chiropractors and acupuncturists to work on the horses. But I noticed when they were working on the horses, these behavioral changes in the horse, these what I call responses, such as the eye blinking. If you're going over the horse really lightly and the eye blinks, then the horse is feeling something under your hand. If you're putting pressure on, they'll brace it out, they'll block it out. But if you're going really lightly, then they have nothing to brace against. Their body has nothing to brace against, but you'll get another subtle sign. But I noticed these subtle changes in behavior, and then there were kind of two things that put it together for me. There was this one guy, an older horse chiropractor from New Zealand, who'd been adjusting horses for 40 years, and he learned from another old guy in New Zealand who'd been adjusting horses for 40 years. I don't know if I've told you the story, but I'll try not to just drag it out. But when he used long lever forceful techniques that would be really hard to learn, but he got amazing results, and he read the horse. He could read the horse when he was evaluating the horse, but also after he made an adjustment, after he got the nose over towards the shoulder, and then the horse relaxed and pushed his head over into the next stall, and it staggered, and then you hear 5 pops, and then he'd step back to see what the horse had to say. And if he got a good adjustment, the horse would start to yawn repeatedly. So I wanted to do what he was doing. And whenever he was around at the show, I would drive him around to the different barns and hold the lead rope just to be there. But then I was at another horse show where our trainer hired these 2 gals to massage the horses, and they started massage by going down the bladder meridian really lightly with their fingers just to connect with the horse and relax the horse. And I noticed along the way that every once in a while the horse would blink or its lip would twitch or something. So I could see there was something the horse was feeling at that point under their fingers. So I started experimenting with it, and they showed me a few things, and I realized that if I went over a spot and I got a blink, and I knew the horse was feeling something, but if I wasn't sure, I would go over again, and if I got a blink at the exact same spot, then it meant something. There was a correlation between what I was doing and the horse was doing. And then if I just stayed there and did nothing and waited, put no pressure on the horse, just did nothing, no rubbing, but just stay nice and light, like barely touching the hair, the horse would start to blink more and drop its head. And every once in a while, the horse would just drop its head and start yawning repeatedly. So there was the same, whatever was going on with the adjustment, a similar thing was happening with the horse's nervous system with me doing nothing. So that's really what got me interested. And so I started experimenting more, and I started adding movement to the techniques. And rather than using long lever forceful techniques, which I wanted to learn how to do that, but I couldn't. I would have to. This old guy I asked, can I apprentice with you? And he said no. just wouldn't be practical. You'd have to travel around the country and pay, follow me around. And he said, besides, I don't teach anybody. He taught his son and one other guy. But he said, just keep doing what you're doing. And I started asking for movement. So rather than adjust all the vertebrae of the neck in one movement, I realized I could move my way down the vertebra of the neck and ask for movement in a relaxed state as I go down the neck, and soften whenever the horse braces. And whenever that happens, if you're going down the neck and there's tension in a joint or connective tissue in the joint anywhere, the horse will tense. And when you soften your hands, the horse will release that tension and you can move through it. And the other visual cues, the yawning, you step back every once in a while to see what the horse has to say, and you'd get those larger release responses like yawning. So it was just by putting two and two together lots over and over again that these movement techniques were incorporated into it. So it was like, rather than adjusting something, you're asking the horse's nervous system to let go of that tension that's causing the misalignment. So alignment isn't important to me because horses aren't symmetrical anyways. Our bodies aren't symmetrical. It's, to me, what's important is releasing the tension that might be pulling on something and creating misalignment or creating tension, and that's affecting the movement of that joint or muscle or area or whatever. Again, a long answer to a short question. I forgot what the question was. Yeah.
And we did have this conversation. It was over a few whiskeys or beers, but I'm not going to name the chiropractor, but remember, we knew one of his apprentices.
Oh yeah, that's right.
In common. So the apprentice that he had is a guy named Scotty Wilson, who's an Australian. And I met him when I was apprenticing. He came through the barn and did a bunch of horses. And just like you're saying, it was long lever stuff. It was a little bit rough, but that guy had an eye for horses like I have never seen. I mean, you could lead the horse down the aisle of the barn and he would watch you leading it up, and he would say, you're having trouble stopping when you're going to the left and turning. I mean, he could tell you everything, and he was always right. And then he would work on that horse, and you'd give it 2 or 3 days off, and when you'd go back to ride them, it was like you had a whole different set of horses. I mean, it was the most phenomenal change in horses I have ever seen. And I was pretty skeptical. I was kind of calling bullshit on all this stuff at that point. I'm probably 24 or something like that. But he made such a difference. It was incredible. And I have to say, I love how much you incorporate the body language into everything. I think when I look at the horse populace out there, that's probably the singular biggest weakness in terms of skills of most people is the inability to read body language well. And so as they're practicing this technique of yours, they are exponentially growing that awareness of the horse and what the horse is telling them. And that's one of the biggest challenges we have as clinicians, is to get people to recognize how significant a conversation is going on all the time. And you're acing.
Well, this is a good way to learn. I mean, it's an easier way to learn it, easier than being on the horse's back. And I when I watched your presentation on bits, I realized, well, you're following the same. You're paying attention what the horse is telling you, because you were describing the sensitivity, like the first signals are from the lips, right, from the bit. And then it goes from there to the tongue, or then, gradually. I mean, I'd love to hear it again because it was fun, but also, you're looking at you're bringing that awareness of what the horse is telling you to the level of the first contact with the bit. And so, it's harder to learn that on the horse's back than if you're standing next to the horse doing the bladder meridian. That's a really easy way to start to pay attention to what the horse is telling you with subtle changes in behavior or body language.
Sure. Well, I'll call that part the action chain. Basically it starts off, you've got unconscious cues that you give the horse whenever you're preparing to do something. And the example I always use, I come from cutting horse world, and those horses are super, super sensitive about stopping. And there's a whole division within every barn of what we call lopers. And those are usually young girls that are saddling and unsaddling and also warming the horses up, and they lope. So they just lope circle after circle after circle until the trainer's ready grab that horse and go work it. And those horses get loped so much and stop so much that it's very common when you're loping them around to warm them up, you'll think to yourself, when I get up there to the gate, I'm going to stop. And when the word stop goes through your brain, that horse will check up on you because your body subconsciously is preparing for the stop that you know is coming, and the horse can feel that. They're so much more sensitive to that than we realize they are. The next part of that action chain is obviously you consciously do something with your body. So it doesn't matter if you're riding a circle or turning left or whatever, your body has a position, your seat position, and so forth. The next is that your hands change on the reins. So you're going to gather up your reins, or you might tighten your hands or something, which again, the horse can.
Or even take a breath, before you go to do something.
Certainly.
Your breathing might change.
Absolutely.
Along with those other things you just described. So
that's when it comes to like people with anxiety and all, that's one of the biggest things that I work with them on. Is this is kind of an aside, but you would be shocked if you pay attention how many people stop breathing when they're riding, and they get to areas where they're tense and they stop breathing, and that's such a signal to the horse, and we don't really realize it. And a lot of times the trouble you're anticipating becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because you cued the horse that something was wrong, But back to the action chain, the next thing would be that as you're moving the reins, the reins are rubbing the horse's neck. So like, for instance, if you had a lot of slack in the reins as you're coming too tight, the horse can feel the reins moving up the neck. Now the reins on the bit, if the reins started off slack, you're going to have the water loops or chains or however reins are connected to the bit, they're going to come up and have friction on the bottom ring of the bit until a straight line is formed. Once the straight line is formed, you can actually start to move the bit, and now we're getting actual movement or signals to the lips and the corners of the mouth.
Yeah, so the lips were way down up the chain.
Yes, sir. Yeah. People, that's the main reason I go through all of this and break it down, is because I want people to learn to slow down, because there's, if you just grab the reins and pull back on them, you skipped 7 steps that should have played out and gave the horse the opportunity to see you coming. And if they see you coming, we don't have that defensive bracing reaction. If they don't see you coming, and every time you touch a rein, it's a oh crap moment for the horse. People have no idea how many horses walk around flinching every time you touch a rein. And it's because they're not reading the body language. If you start making them aware of it, all of a sudden you can't unsee it. There are certain events, like I have a very difficult time watching rodeo because the handling of the roping horses and the barrel horses and all, those horses just are oh crap every single second, and I don't know that I'll ever have an effect on that world, because it is a high adrenaline speed type of a world. But I would sure like to see some of those horses relax at some point in their careers. So anyway, and I have to say, like with the body language, you have opened my eyes and taught me some stuff. I've even had some questions from people on like blinking, for instance, and I've never really considered it to be much of a signal, and I think that's partly because when I'm doing groundwork and things with horses, typically when we have those breakthrough moments, you do get blinking, but it's generally accompanied by larger signals that are more obvious, and kind of, if all I get is blinking, I don't feel like I had much of an effect. I'm starting, after watching you work with a horse, I'm starting to wonder how much I've missed all these years where I should have accepted a smaller try than I was willing to recognize. So you've got me on a path of hunting some experimenting and seeing some new stuff now. So thank you for that.
Well, it's an endless path with horses, right?
Absolutely.
Well, the blinking for me was easy to make the correlation, because like I said, if I go really lightly over an area and the horse blinks, if I go back over it and it blinks at the exact same spot, almost to the hair, then it means something. So that gets your attention then. But when I step back to see what the horse has to say, every once in a while working out, I step back, and at first there may be nothing, and then there might be a couple of blinks. To me, that's a sign something's going on. And if you wait a little longer, something bigger might happen. So, the larger signs, like they might or drop their head and lick and chew or something. And lick and chew. It's like they're feeling something going on inside. That's what the blink is. Yeah.
And it definitely seems to be cumulative as well, so
Yeah.
that they get more and more and more relaxed till they might lay down or whatever.
Right.
Do you find, as you, let's say you're going to work on a horse for an hour, do you find that like you get clearer signals in the first 5 or 10 minutes than you're getting in the last 5 or 10 minutes because they have kind of let go of so much they don't have a whole lot to tell you anymore, or does it stay
Yeah.
pretty consistent throughout?
No, usually a lot of times the horse is really guarded at first. Like you have to look for the smallest little sign, especially different horses are all different, but like the heavier breeds, like the drafty breeds, they are more stoic. And so if you get the smallest little sign, like a lip twitch or eye twitch, that means something with those horses. And then as you work on them, within like 5 or 10 minutes, at some point they let go most of the time, and then they're more comfortable showing you stuff. But after an hour and a half, and sometimes sooner, if something big releases in the horse, they're cooked. Like you can't do anymore because they are just dull. Like they're stop responding. Like if they release something really, really big, or you've been working on the horse for too long, the nervous system just gets overloaded, and then they kind of just shut down and go dull. Like no blink, no bend, no nothing.
Yes, sir.
So does that make sense?
It does. And in fact, I'm going to be arrogant enough to offer you a suggestion here. I think
Sure.
instead of overloaded, I think a better word might be saturated. So,
Saturated.
yeah, so like we are talking about serotonin and that kind of stuff, you have only so many dopamine receptors and so forth. And
Okay.
once you've released dopamine, you saturate the system and you're not really capable of any more of that for the time being until it kind of dissipates. So I
It
think
has to
saturated.
process it somehow. Yeah, the horse has to process. Like Dr. Peters says, like it happens with humans too, because he was a human brain scientist before. Well, he's always been a horseman, but before he retired and then switched his thing to horses. But he says like when you let the horse sit overnight, and same with a human, I think is serotonin is one of the hormones that kind of solidifies things and starts the myelination process or something. So
Yes.
like it's that time. The horse needs that time to process it, and then that's when they really get it, if they have the time. And same with people. He says, overnight you learn something, you're studying something, and then it kind of all makes sense to you, or maybe not when you go to bed, and then the next morning you wake up and oh, it just makes sense now. So
Yes, sir.
that whatever that they've become saturated, and then whatever the chemical process is that happens, that kind of integrates it into their nervous system or their brain.
Yes, sir. We definitely see that in training. You'll have horses that maybe introduce something new today. And I like to do that always a lot. The end of a ride, 5 minutes, we kind of just barely scratch the surface of something showing them new. And the good ones, it's like they sleep on it in the stall at night, and the next day they're 50% past where you stopped yesterday.
Yeah,
It doesn't
yeah, yeah,
always
yeah.
work out like that, but
Yeah, and don't like trainers, like I've heard the term, you have to let it soak, let it soak in, or let the horse soak. So you just give it some time to soak.
yes, sir.
And so, that was helpful to me when I was first started working on horses. I would step back to see what the horse had to say. And then I realized sometimes it took a while before the horse knew what it had to say, and it would show you some releases. But the more that you let the horse soak, then like you can wait. Okay, you just you step back, you waited 30 seconds, 45 seconds, and the horse finally dropped its head and started to yawn. Okay. And then you think, okay, I can go back to work now. But no, let's see what happens if I wait a little longer. Or the horse would, after yawning, would start twitching again. And so I'm going to wait and see what happens if I wait even longer. And sometimes the longer I let that soak in, then I would get more and more releases, more yawning, or they'd shake their whole body, or they'd reach around and scratch, behind the ear with their hind hoof or something. So that soaking whatever's going on in the nervous system, that time element, if you give them more time, it just makes it so much more effective.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
And again, I think that's one of the great things about what you're doing. It makes the people aware of the body language to a degree that most people simply aren't. Whenever I'm working with a customer, a lot of times we'll have a sticky spot with a horse on, could be on anything, but we finally get to that point and I'm like, okay, just sit right there.
Mm-hmm.
One of the hardest things to get people to do is to do nothing, to just
Yeah.
sit on the horse and not stimulate him in some way. And I'm waiting on that lick and chew. And then we'll talk a little more about nervous systems in a minute, but basically we have the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic is rest and digest, and that's when the horse is in a conscious, present frame of mind. And the sympathetic nervous system, the extreme of it is fight, flight, or freeze, and digestion shuts off. That's one of the first triggers of the switch in that nervous system. So when a horse is in the sympathetic nervous system and they transition back to the parasympathetic nervous system, the ninth cervical nerve kicks back on, digestion kicks back on, and they get a release of saliva. And because they get a release of saliva, they lick and chew. And so that's how we know that process is accompanied by a release of dopamine. So we know that licking and chewing is a release of dopamine to the horse. Yeah. I am shocked by the number of people that the horse will start to lick and chew, and they'll pick up the reins and want to ride off. I'm like, no, all of the work we just did was for that moment. You don't dare interfere with that moment. That is a sacred spot right there. You absolutely let that happen. I don't care if I'm talking to you or what. You do not. The example I use, if I catch people, I have a little rule. If they're a 3-time offender on that, they mess up a big signal like that 3 times, I give them the orgasm speech. So like, imagine that you're with your partner and you just reach that happy moment and they throw like a bucket of ice water on you. It just takes you right out of it. And really, you look at them like, what the hell, man? That's what you just did to that horse right there. And when you have an orgasm speech with the person, they don't forget it after that.
They get it. Yeah, right. Okay. Well, I have a kind of a funny, acute story that kind of goes along that line. So when you're working on the horse and you get a few releases, a lot of times they'll drop, the geldings will drop.
Yes, sir.
And, that's a sign of relaxation. And there's some, it's a really good sign. But I also teach, like, if you're working on a stallion, sometimes you get the juices going when you work on them. And especially there's a couple of certain specific techniques. One is when you do, the head up technique, where you're resting their head on your shoulder or your arm to get them to relax the pole into your arm, just to release these muscles. That'll trigger stallions because they put their chin on the mare's back before they mount them. So that's something that I've learned that'll get them going sometimes, and they'll start to huff and puff. And also working down in this area for some reason, in the lower C7 T1 area, it gets stallions excited, and it can get dangerous, because they'll. And so I say, if you're working on a stallion and that starts to happen, first you have to stop what you're doing. And if it gets too dangerous, splash some water on their chest or on their flank, from the water bucket, because that'll kind of snap them out of it. Or horses that nip a lot, rather than smack them 100 times, at some point, just splash water on them. And so my instructor in England, she was coaching one of the certification students, and they're in the stall, and it's a gelding. And every time the gelding dropped, this guy would splash water on it. The poor guy would like suck it up, and Vicky says, "What are you doing?" And she says, "Well, Jim said when that happens, you're supposed to splash water on it." So this poor gelding was getting relaxed, and all of a sudden the cold water on
taking it around. Good luck debeaning him next spring. Huh?
Oh yeah. First person with cold hands is in for a shock. So.
Well, I did want to ask you, I know you're following like bladder meridian and that kind of stuff. How closely does what you're doing correlate with traditional acupressure points? Does it differ, or you could go anywhere on the horse and you're looking for these signs, or are there specific road maps that kind of correlate with the acupressure points, or what?
Yeah, well, the bladder meridian is really the only road map, because I learned that from those massage therapists, those gals that massage horses. They started with the bladder meridian, and I don't know anything about traditional Chinese medicine, and I didn't know. I knew even less then, but it's a place to start. It's just you can do this anywhere on the horse's body. I just learned to start with the bladder meridian, and so it was really to teach people, because then they have a map to follow. So if you're teaching people, this gives them a good start. But you can do this anywhere on the horse's body, anywhere If you're going lightly over the horse and they give you a response, if you stay there, it means they're feeling something under that. So anywhere on the horse's body. So people that do acupuncture or acupressure, they'll see correlations. They'll say, oh, that's BL24. And I go, okay, I trust you on that one, but I don't know what BL24 does. So the bladder meridian is the only really map that we introduced this with. But it's interesting because I'll listen to those people. Like if we're working together and they say, oh, this point here, it has to do with this and this and this, I'll pay attention because it might have something to do with what's going on in the horse's body. So there are correlations with the different points that the horse might respond to. And that brings up another thing. If you do any modality at all with the horse, if you add in the visual feedback from the horse, it's going to make whatever you're doing more effective. So if you do acupuncture, acupressure, and you're paying attention to the horse's responses, then there's more information you have that might help you be more effective at what you're doing.
Absolutely. One thing this kind of brings up for me is just a facet that I know about you that I kind of appreciate, and I feel like there's a little kindred spirit in this. You are almost resistant to following up knowledge with some of these traditional modalities that have already existed. And I'll attempt to explain what I think is going on, and you could tell me if I'm correct or not. But okay. You are more concerned with following what the horse tells you, and if you follow the same path that all the traditional people have followed, you're going to get to the same place, and there's really no new, there's no innovation, there's no, and your whole thing is pretty innovative, and it's all been the horse showing you the path. I kind of feel a little bit that way with my bit stuff because I'm very much trying to kill some dogma and stuff that's existed for a long time. But when you follow the horse, you don't get the same answer. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, like you're open to something that fits in with what you're teaching, right? With the bit. Like if you hear something that, oh, that makes sense, and then you're open to it, and I am too. So, but I'm just constantly reminded that how uneducated I was when I started this. And if I had been following the bladder meridian and I got a blink and then I thought, oh, I should do some shiatsu on this one, or I should do some acupressure, or I should do something, I would have stopped paying attention to the horse, or not really been paying attention to the horse. So with this method, I don't like to, apart from, I'm naturally lazy too, so I don't really want to think too much about stuff. If it's working, I'd rather just keep doing it, And so if I learn too much, study too much other stuff, even subconsciously, it might be affecting what I'm doing, paying attention to the horse. But on the other hand, if I learn something that fits in with what I'm doing, I'll incorporate it. But I don't want to go down that path. I want to stay with the horse on it. So, I kind of joke that thinking's way overrated because when you're doing this type of body work, you pretty much stop thinking. You're following the horse's responses, and then you get a blink and you wait. And then you realize, wow, I'm not thinking anything. I'm just waiting on the horse. And so I just kind of like to stay away from if people are learning this, that they learn this. And then after they learn it, then they can start, incorporating other stuff. But, I've seen lots of people, they'll learn this and then they'll get caught up in something else and go down that path. Hopefully they're still paying attention to the horse.
Yes, sir.
So,
I really believe that deal you have about watching the horse and the body language and all it's just invaluable. I mean, it takes a lot of us decades to learn to read the horse and to be that aware and everything.
To be aware of it, yeah. Just to be aware of it and then start to trust it, and follow it rather than.
Absolutely.
So I'm not against people or doing other things, but I think, it's important to me for what I do and what I teach. And it served me so well and it's helped lots of horses is to not lose that. So, and besides, I've got a job now, it's to teach this. And so I don't want to learn too much other science, only enough that it makes sense what I'm doing, that I don't want to go down. So, and plus, I'm getting old and I don't remember things. So, but it's funny because it's been this way since, the 20 years ago when I started doing this. It still was, I don't want to go down that path, and I don't want to go down this modality path. I don't want to go down that modality path, even though it was tempting. So, but I could learn more about biomechanics in the horse and how the body works, because then it starts to make sense. Oh, I should search in this area, because I know from experience and from looking at anatomy book that the psoas muscles attach under the lumbar spine here. And if I spend time up here where I get responses, it's a combination of, I know the importance of the psoas muscles, the core muscles under the lumbar spine, and they attach inside the pelvis and inside the femur. And when I got responses up in the lumbar area, and I remember one specific time I'm working on the horse, and it was a Grand Prix jumper, and I just was waiting like 3 or 4 minutes on these responses in the lumbar, and the horse took a big deep breath, and his back came up, and so I'm picturing, well, those core muscles just let go, so. And then I got moving in that junction, and I focused on really getting that loose. And then I came back the next week, and the guy says, "What'd you do to my horse?" And I thought, oh, I screwed up. I screwed up another one. No, I didn't. And he said, I said, well, I worked on his lumbosacral junction for quite a while because he was not moving in there. And he says, wow, he's jumping like crazy. So, that's just all that feedback and understanding a little bit about the biomechanics. As I go along, I learned the biomechanics and the anatomy. I didn't study the anatomy beforehand, because then it would influence what I was hearing or seeing from the horse. Does that make sense? And it's just the way I chose to do it. It doesn't mean, I know people that come to our courses that are already equine massage therapists or some type of modality, and they know lots of anatomy. Once they get out of their head on it and they just focus on the horse, then that comes in really handy once they really learn to focus on the horse. So they can be really, really good because they know a lot of anatomy and biomechanics, but they didn't let it influence what they were seeing from the horse.
Paralysis by analysis, I think it might be what you're describing. I see that a lot whenever biomechanics, we get these words and these fads that come through the industry, and they start out really good, and after about 5 years I'm kind of cringing a little bit every time I hear them. And biomechanics is one of those phrases for me. I've seen some people that go down the wormhole there, and like it just, I can think of a customer that I had that she would be lunging a horse, and he had gotten away with some stuff. He was a little sassy 2-year-old, and he had learned when she was lunging him to the left, he would turn his head to the right, violently rip the rope out of her hand and get away from her. Well, because she had been down this biomechanics wormhole and also barefoot horse trimming, she thought that she needed to get her rasp out and adjust his left front hoof. And that was really what the cause of the problem was. I'm like, no, you need to whip his ass on the left and keep him from bending his head to the right. That's what's causing the problem. But, she believed it was all biomechanical. I'm like, no, that is not what's going on here.
Well, the horse may have learned, a lot of these things I'm talking about, or these principles it's the same when you're horse training, right? As a trainer. So, I recognize right off the bat that you're a trainer that understands these principles, and you're, even though you're on first impression, you're this big, Louisiana redneck guy that's, that one of these you get on and go kind of, and then I realized, well, no, he's not like that at all. He's just, that's just I
like to surprise people.
So but the same principles in training as in body work. It's the same nervous system, so but you do get caught up, people do get caught up in that, and I start to get caught up in that, and then I catch myself right away. I'm pretty good at catching myself. Wait a minute, what am I really seeing here? And follow that rather than go down a rabbit hole. But
your whole thing really does follow the pathway of evidence-based, which is another one of those terms that's coming up probably because of Dr. Peters and Mark Black. But I mean, that's you don't necessarily have to understand it, but all of the evidence of it does definitely work this way, and there's definitely a recurring pattern that we can do. It's all sitting right there for anybody to see. I think even people that really don't know how to read body language would watch you work a horse, and it would be very evident in 10 minutes that good things are going on here. Well, this would probably be a great time to pause for our sponsor of this episode. Unfortunately, I forgot to write the sponsor of this episode, so I'm going to have to just cut it back in at some point. So if the audio sounds a little different, folks, I apologize.
Okay.
So we'll come back from that sponsor cut in later, and I've got some questions from some of my people that I put on Facebook. I was telling Jim before this started, I have a Facebook group, Bits, Spurs, and Good Sense, and I always, before I do a podcast interview like this episode won't be released for 2 or 3 weeks probably, but I always tell them I'm interviewing so and so tomorrow. Do y'all have any questions? And normally I get 2, 3, 4 questions. For you, I have like 15. You're the most interesting question person I've ever had by a long ways. So
maybe I'm the most confusing. That's why there's so many questions.
I don't think so. I think you're very easy to follow and on. And this episode of Adult Onset Horsemanship is brought to you by Jack Hammer's Equine Spinal Alignment Services. Jack Hammer. At Jack Hammer's Equine Spinal Alignment Services, Jack Hammer. You can count on us to service your needs. If you don't know Jack, get to know him. Jack has spent minutes learning the ins and outs of the horse's body, so that he can chisel away all your pony's problems. Plus, he's got a sweet candy apple red Z28 and will adjust your horse with his 6-foot python Damien draped across his shoulders, of course. Hammer time. With a pair of brand new 8-pound Minnesota mauls, Jack can take a whack at your cayuse's conundrums. It's hammer time, baby. Horses are big, and we don't play around with hand pressure and those little plastic spring-loaded actuators. No, ma'am. We bring the big guns to get the job done. So if your caballo is no bueno, call Jack, and we'll hammer out the problemos and look fuego doing it. Smoking. Jack Hammer's Equine Spinal Alignment Services. Give us a whack. Hammer time. I figured you and I would have more banter. We've been a little bit more on the serious side for this, but if you don't know, Jim Masterson is absolutely fucking hilarious. He is a hoot to be around. I didn't know that until I met you at the Practices Summit, but I think I had more fun with you than maybe anybody else there. We had a really good time.
I didn't know till you did your presentation on bits, which is a hoot too. So I don't know if that's on your website or anywhere or on YouTube, but if it is, people should see it. So.
Well, thank you. Yeah, we sell the DVD and the digital downloads on the website there. So I appreciate you bringing that up. So I did have a question specifically on stifles. Do you have any insights on horses that have stifle problems, something there that you can influence? Or
well, the stifles, in my experience, sore stifles go with a lot of soreness and tension in the groin muscles, and so it makes sense that those muscles that catch in the stifle area are going to be pulling on the stifle joint, in addition to muscles on the outside of the stifle that it might be torquing it. But if you can release tension on these muscles and the other soft tissue associated with stifles, wherever the horse tells you, it's going to help. As opposed to the hock, where the hock, there isn't a lot of muscle around the hock that you can release tension on. But the stifle, there's a lot of muscles, and I think that's where stifle problems start. They start by putting tension and torque on the stifle joint, which is a little complex joint. It's kind of complex with the patella and everything, but these muscles and things start pulling. This is really basic because that's how I think. Muscles start pulling on and torquing. Muscles don't pull evenly, and they start to torque the joint, and then that puts the joint a little out of alignment. Then so the first thing that they treat usually are ligaments. When there's stifle problems, they'll inject something to toughen up the ligaments. But then if you can keep that tension from building up, then it may not eventually become a joint problem. If you can, work on it on the level of the soft tissue before it becomes a joint problem. So anything there's a stifle point just inside the stifle. I call it the stifle point because it's just inside the patella. And if you search in there for blinks, if you stay there and wait, the horse will start to relax whatever it is that tension is. and the groins, some of the groin muscles attached there. You have to be careful. Don't just stick your hand in there. If the horse pins his ears, that means he's got sore stifles. And so take your hand out. But you can search on the outside of the stifle for blinks and just wait till you get responses. And the idea is just keep those muscles from getting so tight and torquing the joint. The hocks are a little different. There's not as much muscle, but you release tension on the sacrum and you release tension on the hocks via the hamstring. So hocks and hamstrings and sacrum and sacroiliac all go together. And from my point of view, and then the stifles, it's in the groin muscles and also muscles on the outside of the stifle. If you can, get the horse to regularly relax those muscles, it might help.
Yeah. In my experience, a lot of times stifle problems are weakness problems. Have you seen a correlation there? Like I've seen horses, if we're down here, we have nothing but flat land. I had a customer that wound up with a piece of property that was very wet, so they had to build the barn up like 8 feet. And so her horses have to go up this 10-foot hill in and out of the barn 10 times a day, and just walking up that hill solved all of his stifle problems. And like ground poles and things like that are also very helpful for horses with stifles.
Yeah, so conditioning stifles is important, and it's important to do it gradually. As you don't just do 45-degree going up and down the hill for an hour. You do it in smaller intervals. But you can have weak stifles because they're weak and they need conditioning, and you can have weak stifles because they're over sore. So if you put your hand down there and the horse pins his ears and picks up his leg, to me that means the muscles need to be relaxed, and they're not healthy. They're just too tight and sore. So if you can get the horse to release tension in those muscles, or just do light, more walking and cut back on the conditioning, to me that when they're that sore, then you're conditioning unhealthy muscles. So that there's kind of the horse can have weak stifles because they need conditioning, in which case they're not super sore when you put your hand down there. So like if you put your hand up in the horse's groin and he tries to kick you, to me that means the muscles need to be relaxed and to get circulation going in, and you're working with healthy muscles.
Yes. Or maybe
the opposite would be just weak because they need conditioning. There's two sides of the weak stifles to me.
Yes, sir. Or maybe if he pins his ear when you put your hand in there, you've put too much cold water on his pecker.
Yeah, if you're the one that you're the one with the cold hands or the cold water. Yeah.
Well, we had you've already talked about this a little bit, but there was a question about releasing a tight psoas, and I'm adding to that because I know it's SI involved in all the hunter's bump. And if you'll allow me just a second, I don't know if a lot of people know this. Maybe this will connect the dot with the psoas muscles, and I believe there's 3 of them up in there. This is basically, if we were looking at like a cow, this is what the tenderloin is. So it's up underneath the rib cage on the inside, and it's not a real big, real strong muscle. And as the tenderloin, right, it's not a muscle that is used to a lot of use. So it's one of those that we can cause some problems in if we get a horse using it too much and they're not conditioned. So what are your thoughts on that? You're releasing that from the top. Do you go down toward the hip and sort of the flank area at all there? Or?
No, I release it from the top because it's deep. It's under the lumbar spine, and then the lumbar spine is under that much muscle. So when the wings or the transverse processes of the lumbar spine are probably that deep. And what you're feeling if you're running your fingers on the spine are the spinous processes of those vertebrae. So I remember watching a vet, drop a needle that deep down in there once at a show, and I said, "What are you injected?" And he says, "Just the lumbar spine." He says it's that deep, underneath there. So the psoas muscles attach underneath that, and that's the only way I know to access them. And I would never have known that would be where you release tension in the psoas muscles if I hadn't spent enough time on that area with enough horses that all of a sudden the back relaxes, and then the feedback from the rider is now he's using his hind end. So horses that lumbo, I used to call it the sacral lumbar junction, but it's supposed to be the lumbosacral junction if you're going anatomy wise from the head to the tail, but that's too much thinking. But anyways, so the junction, the hind end junction, your horse's hind end should move like this, that's how the hind end should work. And when they get stuck, those psoas muscles get tight and they get stuck in that junction, they end up paddling. They're paddling like that. And then they're putting stress and strain on the stifles and the hocks, and they're not using their hind end properly. So when I spent enough time in that area, I realized, oh, that's what psoas are, probably the psoas are letting go because they get shut down, or they stop working, or they should, work like that. And they end up like a shock absorber that stops working. They just don't work anymore. So you can kind of wake them up. But also that's part of that. I learned that the lighter you go, the deeper the horse feels the tension. If you massage the lower back muscles, you're going to release tension in the lower back muscles. But I've just, come to realize after working on so many horses that the lighter you go, the deeper they feel it. And then when they release, it's deep, like with the bladder meridian, they're releasing tension in the core and the postural muscles, the muscles of the spine. When that lets go, the whole horse changes. So that light work, that acts more deeply. But the psoas muscles, like you have the back and then you have the hind end here, right? And the psoas muscles are like a hypotenuse to the triangle. But I invented a new word. It's the hippopotamus because it's a horse. But it stops working, and so that junction stops moving properly. And so when that psoas shuts down, this whole junction stops working, and that's when the horse paddles behind or doesn't flex in the back. So another interesting fact, I don't even know if it's a fact, but I know that the filet mignon is the tastiest cut of steak in the cow, and that's the psoas muscle, right? The tenderloin. Mm-hmm. And I always wondered why, if it works so hard, why is it so tender on the cow? But then I'm looking at a cow and I think that cow has never used his psoas muscle in his life. He just stands there and eats. And so that's probably why it's so tender. You can cut this part out if you want. We're talking about eating the anatomy, but anyways.
I think it's relevant. It's another point of reference that'll give people, something to kind of understand where that is. Do you find any correlation here, like in the famous hunter's bump, where we start to get kind of that peak on top of the hip of certain horses? Yeah. Is that something you can typically influence and release some tension in, or not so much?
Yeah. So when I see the hunter's bump, you see there's a couple things, like the back is roached, right? The lumbar is kind of roached, and you can see it's kind of arched. And then at the back here, it's pulled down, and then the tuber sacral, the pelvis bones on top, they're stretched out. And so I think that's a result. That's why they call it the hunter bump, of overusing the hind end, so that the ilium of the pelvis, they pull up, and then the sacrum pulls down. And to me, it's a sign that it's just of overexertion. The horse is overusing that part of its body. And that's what's happened. So I've worked on a lot of horses that have that they go fine. They still can jump, they still do their job, but it's still a sign that the horse has been overexerted behind, to me, consistently. Now, sometimes if it's a young horse, you'll work on it, and the back will come down a little bit, that roach. And as it's been explained to me, and I don't know for sure, but so you have, I'm going to try to draw this here, and I'm not a very good artist. So you have, you have can you see that?
I cannot. It's too much. Okay, I see a little bit there. Yes, sir.
Oh, well. So you have there's the tail back there. Mm-hmm. There's the hind leg there, and here's the back up here. And this psoas muscle, when it tightens up, I've been told that's what causes that roach there, because it's pulling down here and here. Yes. So this roach comes up, and it's also pulling down on the sacrum here, which causes that dip just in front of the bump, the pelvis.
So it's like taking two legs of a teepee and pulling them closer together, and the peak rises at the top.
Right. Yeah.
For those that are just listening.
So the psoas muscles tighten up, I imagine, and then that causes that roach in the back. And that roach, if it's been there a long time, it's not going to go away, in my experience. But it doesn't mean the horse is hurting. Sometimes it's way past that stage where anything's uncomfortable. It's just that's the way the things are now, kind of like when we get crooked. We get one shoulder dips far, down lower than the other, and our pelvis kind of gets rotated. And then that's just after years of moving that way, because we're right-handed or left-handed, so things aren't even. There's unilateral tension, so that just ends up the way our skeleton is because the ligaments have hardened up. So with the hunter's bump, I've worked on a lot of horses that have it, that they are still jumping well and they're not in pain or discomfort. It's just a sign that they were overexerted in the past. But I think if you have a younger horse and you start to see that happening, if you back off on that work and then do some body work, things will come back, to a little more normal.
I do have more questions, but I'm kind of feeling, as you're saying, this might be good to clarify something. You have 4 different levels of pressure that you use. Would you mind talking about that a little bit? Mm-hmm. Like you were just talking about being very, very light to go deeper.
Yeah. So when I started teaching it, I had to come up with some kind of description of the levels of pressure. So rather than saying you're using 2.5 pounds of pressure over a 3 square inch area for a period of 90 seconds, I would say, well, do is egg yolk pressure, the amount of pressure it would take to just kind of indent an egg yolk, where the horse told you to do it, and wait until he releases. So the first level of pressure I call air gap. It's just barely touching the hair or the skin, just barely, no pressure. And that's one thing that's hard for people to get, as you know from training, is people to really soften, And then the next level I call egg yolk. And so if you were to crack an egg here on my arm and then just indent the yolk, that would be egg yolk. So that would be about like that. And then the next level I call grape, which would be, amount of pressure to squeeze a grape without breaking it. And then the next level I call lemon, which is pretty hard. And then the highest I call lime. It's hard, almost as much pressure as you can put on. So there's that range there from nothing to lime. But the key is whatever level of pressure you're using, you're staying underneath the horse's bracing response. So when you use no pressure, they can't brace against it at all. That's how you find via the blink or the lip twitch where the horse is feeling something, by putting no pressure on it. So those are the 4 levels of pressure. So the air gap, egg yolk, grape, and then lemon and lime. So there's
just call it Sprite.
Yeah. Yeah, but don't splash it on the horses.
Is there a like you most commonly use this and most rarely use this, like 83.29% of the time?
Well, there'll be each technique that you learn. You'll start with a certain level of pressure, like the bladder meridian, or searching for any response is light. I call it light touch on the horse. You're going to use air gap, and so and there's certain techniques where you use egg yolk. For example, under the tail on each side, there's a point. It's actually a chiropractic technique called the Logan Basic, but I can't, picture them using it on humans, but apparently that's where it came from. But with the horse, you put your thumb under the tail on the one side, and you just use egg yolk pressure or air gap somewhere in there. So when you're learning a technique, you learn what level of pressure to start with. And then from there, you can adjust it by what the horse is telling you. You can adjust the level of pressure. So certain levels of pressure go with certain techniques. But if you find at any point that the horse is no longer responding or is physically bracing, then you have to back off to a lighter level of pressure.
Okay, I like that. The answer is most often lightening up. I like that.
If there's ever any doubt, you go lighter. So if things aren't working, the horse is either internally or externally bracing against it. And so but that's the way you train too. So
yeah, like I've talked about, people becoming aware of the horse, but if more people could recognize where the line is that the horse braced against you and learn to stay on this side of it, oh my goodness, the change we would have would just be tremendous.
And if there's ever any doubt, back off, go lighter, and see if the horse will respond to that. Because when the horse is bracing, when you soften, they stop bracing, but we miss that part. Because we keep bracing or we let go completely, like there's a place in the middle there, right? Yes, between. Because when you're training a horse, you're asking him to do something. And so if you let go completely, then the horse doesn't know what you want. And if you're bracing and he's bracing, then you're just both bracing and he's going to win that one ultimately. So you soften until all of a sudden, oh wow, this is what I'm supposed to be getting. So it's the same with the body work. But we're looking for visual, usually either visual cues when we soften, or if it's a movement technique, like I use the neck again. You're going down the neck and you're wiggling your way down the vertebra of the neck and using the nose and wiggling your way down. And if you hit it's relaxed movement, and you hit a spot where the horse is feeling tension, and then he'll brace against it. And when you soften, he lets some of that tension go, and then you can move through it. So there's palpable responses and visual responses, but they're the same thing. The horse is telling you that's uncomfortable, and you have to soften enough for him to let it go.
Very good. Are there certain major problem areas where, like, you most commonly find tension in these particular spots? We've already talked about the lumbosacral junction.
Yeah.
I guess that's one of them.
Yeah, the three key junctions that are the pole atlas junction, where the first vertebra, the skull and the first vertebra. That's probably the most important junction in the whole horse. Anything going on in the body is going to show up as tension in the pole. Compensating for pain behind is going to show up as tension in the pole, or direct, like dent or the bit, or the rider is going to show up as tension in the pole. The horse pulling back against, hard tying a horse to teach him not to pull back. I worked on lots of horses that are jammed up here because they fought against that so hard. But so that's kind of pretty more direct trauma. But anything going on in the body affects the pole and atlas. And then when the pole and atlas isn't moving and it's tense, it affects the rest of the body. So that's the most important junction, is the pole and atlas. And then the next is the neck shoulder withers, where the C7 and T1 join, and the scapula joins in that junction. And the third is the sacroiliac and lumbosacral junction. Those three key junctions, they get torqued, unilateral tension. And then when that happens, it's everything around it tightens up. So, but that would be a good start, would be the three key junctions. But the poles are most important. But there are, I'm just trying to think of the common areas, but pretty much the whole horse. But the back and the lower back the back can be sore from saddle fit, but it can be sore from lots of things.
So one thing that brought up to me, and I hadn't really planned on asking you this, but if we divided the spine up into its major sections, we have the cervical spine and the neck. We have the thoracic spine, which is where the neck ends, your rib cage basically, and then the lumbar spine is the lower back, and then the sacral spine is below that. Right. So you don't see very many problems in the thoracic lumbar junction, right? That seems to be the only major junction where you're not talking. So is that
so when I'm talking about the three key junctions and then everything else in between, but is what you're working on. But those are transition points, where the atlas and the skull joint, transition point. The C7T1, it's a transition. The thoracic lumbar junction is a transition point too, but it's not as it doesn't show up as much as the other. I think the other junctions affect the whole area, like the sacroiliac. When you get a spasm or torque in that junction, it's like when we have sacroiliac pain, or like everything around it tightens up. And it's the same with the C7T1. The T18L1, the thoracic lumbar junction, stuff doesn't show up there as much, but when you do get a spasm, like I'll palpate the horse looking for sore spots too. It's not all, when I'm evaluating the horse. That's the interesting junction, because if you get a spasm right at T18L1, to me, it's a red flag that something's going on the hind end, one side or the other, somewhere on the right hind or left hind. And so what's happening is every stride, they're compensating slightly, and it creates a spasm at T18L1. So that's a sign to me, if there's a spasm right at T18L1, that there's something could be going on. And it's always could be, there's never like, A plus B always equals C, although it probably does. But that's just a sign, if you have a spasm right there, that something could be going on behind in the hock or stifle on one side that's causing them to twist every stride and spasm right there. So it's like an indicator. But sometimes it's hard to find. If you have a horse with a really bad fitting saddle or a sore back, it might be hard to find that right at T18L1. But if you're paying close attention, that will show up.
Would you say that, like, that's also one of the parts of the horse that's probably one of the least mobile junctions? They really have very little range of motion right there. So
that's one of the least mobile. And so that's probably why it's not You know, that's kind of a compensation thing, that spasm there. They're compensating for discomfort behind. It's not really because that junction was overworked, for example. It's not, because there's not a lot of movement in there. Yeah, you're right there, now that you mention it.
One of the questions that I had was for owners that have multiple horses and not very much time on their hands, how easy or flexible is it to get started with the Masterson method?
Well, just the bladder meridian, you know, there's a 15-minute video on our website. It's free. Or go on my YouTube channel. I have, you know, like, I don't know, 15 or 20 videos on different things you can do with your horse. But just start with the bladder meridian and start paying attention to your horse and start to experience how your horse can release tension with you just doing nothing but keeping the horse's awareness on where that is in a way that it can't brace against it. And then you just go in steps, you know, like you can go on the YouTube channel and learn, you know, I do the lateral cervical flexion. And then if the way I wanted to structure it is that, you know, I want to put stuff out there that you're able to learn online or from the book, and then you go out and practice it. Like if you get the book, I want you to go out and use those techniques, not just, you won't hurt the horse with this as long as you're not bracing against the horse. But then you learn, and then if you want to learn more, you'll come and learn more, and then you'll learn the next level. So if you learn some things on YouTube or the book and DVD, I want you to practice them. If you reach a point where, no, I need help with this, okay, I'll go do a weekend seminar. And then you'll get hands-on training with an instructor. And then if you want to learn more, you go do the advanced course. So I kind of, you have to start someplace and just start doing it. And the bladder meridian, you can do that every morning when you're out grooming your horse. Just take 10 minutes and just do some of it. You don't have to do all of it. And every day do a little more is what I would recommend.
And then they do need that reset period. So you're not necessarily working on a horse day, you know, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. You might do a nice session with a horse and then not touch that horse again, or not go through this
so
again.
If you do a whole session on the horse head to tail with, say, what's in the Beyond Horse Massage book, he's going to need at least 4 or 5 days off. You don't want to do an hour and a half on a horse in that and then just jump in the next day. So it's going to need, I would say, a week between full sessions. But you can do a little bit every day. You can do a little like 15 minutes of bladder meridian one day, and then do a little more the next day. And then you might come the next day and do a little lateral flexion, you know, just a little every day was fine. But the key is you're still following the horse. If you come back after the 3rd day and you do something that you just did yesterday and the horse stops responding, like nothing, their nervous system, they're saturated. So you need to let them dry out.
Yes, sir.
Does that go with saturation? I don't know. Dry out probably isn't. But, you know, the horse will tell you, they'll either completely stop giving you responses or they won't let you touch them. If they're really overdone and you come back the next day or even in the same session, at some point the horse just pins his ears every time you go to touch him. It's because something big is released and he needs time. He just needs time, and he won't let you touch him, or he'll go completely kind of blank. And it's interesting because it'll be like no blinks, no responses. You wait, nothing happens, just completely nothing there. Or you go to do lateral flexion and they just don't bend. You know, it's interesting. The horse will say, the body will say, that's all it can do. So,
well, I find your method of going about this extremely flexible. So I don't think it would be difficult at all for people to have multiple horses and kind of just play along with it. And do you find that, like, as you get more experienced and more adept at it, that things speed up for you a little bit, or?
You know, they do speed up, but then I found this, you know, even with me, I found I'd be going too fast. You can't have an agenda. So I found that I would end up I had an agenda and I didn't even know it. I thought, no, I'm going nice and slow, just like I did yesterday. I'm going nice and slow, but I got into this pace of this is what slow is. And then I found that you can't have an agenda when you're going. You really have to pay attention to the horse. When I was working on lots of horses, and then I was also teaching, when I stopped working on show horses and going out and taking clients, I found that I really slowed down when I worked on a horse, and I got much better results. So I had developed a certain way of doing it. And you probably, riding and training is the same thing. You know, you get into this way of doing the same thing every time. And then I realized when I stopped doing that and slowed way down and really paid attention to the horse, that it was much more effective and worked better. So.
Yes, sir.
But
One of
for
those.
people that have a lot of horses, just do a little, just don't be afraid to do a little bit at a time. Don't be afraid to, you can't do it wrong, and you don't have to do the whole thing. You don't have to do the whole bladder meridian on both sides. You don't have to do the whole bladder meridian. You don't even have to start at the pole. You can start anywhere in the back. Just start looking for responses. You don't have to do like you can't really do it wrong. You can always do it better. So.
I love that. Would you say that, or, and again, this may not be a right or wrong sort of a thing, but let's say I have 5 horses. Would it be better for me to work horse A as thoroughly as I can, even if that takes days, or would it be better for me to do like the pole atlas and neck on all 5 horses and kind of
Oh.
see what the differences were, and then I sort of do them in sections? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I would do them in sections. Yeah. And compare. That'd be a good way to do it. And then you don't feel the pressure of doing the whole horse, you know.
One of the things I did when I was experimenting with bits a lot, somebody would give me this new weird bit, and I'm riding 15 horses, and I would ride that bit on all 15 of them for a week, and then I could see how it affected horses with this personality or at this level of training. It gives you a better idea of what this bit really does, where if you look at it in too isolated a context, you don't really get the true picture.
Yeah. Well, that would be as opposed to like taking a horse and then the same horse doing 10 bits on it. If that's different than like if you use the same horse bit on 15 horses, you can compare what's going on with that bit. So how did you get so into the bits, as a trainer?
I've always liked them, and I actually the first 2 years of college I was in engineering, so I've always had a very strong affinity for physics and that sort of stuff. And then I was training horses already at that point, and I changed over to pre-veterinary medicine and all, and then decided at the end of my undergrad that I didn't want to go to vet school. I wanted to continue training horses, which my parents were thrilled with that decision, let me tell you. But honestly, I did kind of spur of the moment. I did some bit videos that I put on YouTube, and they've been the most successful bit videos that I have released for the most part. And I thought I would just capitalize on it. And I've always thought it is an area that has probably more dogma and misinformation and that sort of stuff in it than any other. But I did do a lot of research. When I decided I was going to do that video, I did about 6 months of hardcore research, looking into different stuff and picking brains. My greatest fear is that I'm going to put something out there and be wrong. And so I want to be darn sure that my butt was covered. And I continue to learn. And I mean, honestly, that video, I think I finished the filming and everything for it maybe 4 years ago. And there's already stuff that I wish I could go back and say differently or whatever, because I've learned a little bit since then and understand that maybe the way I explained that wasn't exactly the way that it is to the degree that I understand it now. So
yeah, well, that comes up with me sometimes too, because I will have changed something, but I would, or I might have done something a little different, or even more softer than it was before. But that's just how things evolve.
yes,
They'll still get 90% of that first video. Well, the very first video, was in like 2004 or something, and I look back at that now, and sometimes I cringe a little bit, but nobody else does. So,
yeah.
but it's interesting because like you started, like you had some engineering and kind of mechanical aptitude, but you also were interested enough in what's going on with the horse to want to go to vet school. And then your parents are trainers too?
No, not at all. My dad was
okay.
a banker.
You were training. So, but it's interesting that you could take that mechanical part and apply it like in such subtle steps to the bit. It's not about the mechanical. I mean, it's not all about the mechanics of the bit. It's about what the horse is feeling.
Yes, sir.
It comes first, physically feeling, which translates into mentally feeling. But
another oddity is I'm also an amateur knife maker. I've always had an affinity for knives, and probably 10 or 12 years ago, I started making knives. And some of the stuff that I learned metallurgy wise and knife making has come around into bits. And you kind of just think of like if I didn't have those two weird disconnected hobbies, then that connection may never have been made, because ordinarily no horse person would understand this aspect of metallurgy, because they're just, totally.
Yeah, because that's not what they do. But in your presentation on bits, you talked about metallurgy and about the different metals and the surfaces of the metal and the other qualities of the metal and how it affects which I found interesting, because you normally wouldn't hear that. But you also, if you listen to some presentation on bits, usually it's all mechanical, and yours is really gets into what the horse is feeling even before they feel the pressure on the bit. Yeah, so that was pretty unique. But I'd recommend anybody that's watching, if this goes out on our thing, I would recommend that they watch your stuff on bits, because it's not just about the mechanics of the bit, and what's the best bit. It's not about that. It's about really paying attention to what's going on with your horse, and paying attention to what's going on with the bit itself, and then putting that together. So I like that. There was something else I was going to say, but I forgot. Oh, well.
And I will just say, in that video, we do, the latter half of it does get into the mechanics and stuff, but I do feel like kind of the first half is the stuff people tend to not consider, that is just as important as the mechanics. And to me, if you don't understand that action chain and how all of that plays out, you really don't have the understanding or the feel in your hands to take advantage of the different mechanics in the different bits anyway. And so the mechanics really don't become important until you become skilled to a certain level. Is how I view it.
Yeah, because the mechanics I'm not saying that mechanics are important, they are important, but that's not where you start.
For sure.
You start with what you said, the chain of what the horse is feeling. So, and then I was impressed by it. So, and I learned a ton. So,
well, thank you.
Anyways, the point is, I think everybody should watch the educational stuff you have on bits. Plus it's fun,
We do try to be a little funny from here.
People learn better when their guard is down. Like they're not like, oh, I got to get this. You can make it that. I think that's how humans learn. It's probably with horses and animals too. They learn from the dopamine. When you say something funny and somebody laughs, they get a dopamine hit. When they get the joke, they just learn. That's a dopamine.
It keeps them awake and aware. Yes, sir. Otherwise, they fall asleep and they're not catching it anymore. So we definitely, I use humor like a tool for sure. There's got to be a joke every so often to kind of perk everybody up and
like everybody gets caught. Well, not everybody. A lot of times people get caught up in the anatomy. They want to learn this, but I don't know the anatomy, and the instructor's going to be spouting a bunch of Latin words, and so when I'm talking about anatomy, I'll go, this is the spaghetti asparagus, and this is these muscles up under here are the stuckus up under us muscles, and and that then they laugh, they get a little dopamine hit, then they start learning instead of worrying about it.
No horse is ever going to ask you for the proper name of what you just adjusted, are they?
Nuh-uh.
Well, the next question, I'm very proud. This is the first time this has ever happened. My wife has a question for me to ask. Y'all, of course, hit it off over there. She absolutely loved. Jim is a world-class photo bomber. I don't know if there's a single photograph from that summit that doesn't have you hopping up in the back with rabbit ears.
That's the first time I ever photo bombed.
Oh, really?
Well, I think so. I can't think of it. There were so many photos going on, and all the presenters got along really well at that summit, the Best Horse Practices Summit.
They really did.
They got along really well. So it was just fun to start with. So.
Yes, sir. Nobody was braced up. We were all good, relaxed frame of mind. So her question is, and I don't know if you remember this, but my wife is a cow person. She's not into horses, she's into show cattle. So she's been playing with this on her cows. If using egg yolk and you keep activating the panniculus carnosus, are you being too soft because her cows keep thinking that she is a fly?
Oh, is that the twitching muscle?
Yes, sir. I asked her, she went and looked that up. She said she actually remembered it from school.
Anyway. Yeah, I probably have been told that, but it happens on horses when you're going down the withers or the shoulder, they'll twitch because they think it's a fly. So on cows, apparently it's the same. You just need, so if you're going down and they start to twitch like it's a fly, just give them a little contact. And then when they stop twitching, go back again to light.
Okay.
Because if they think it's a fly, then yeah, it's not working. So what I do, if they start to twitch, I just give them a little more contact and then go back to light again. So they know it's not a fly.
Kind of like saying it's me.
Yeah. Every time they twitch, just give them a little contact. Yeah.
The next question is, can you explain energy releases? And I'm sorry, that's a little abstract, but that's what they wrote. I don't know how to tell you what they mean more by that.
So sometimes people say you can do the search response stay release, which is basically the bladder meridian. I call it searching for a response. When you get a response, you stay there and do nothing till you get a release. You can do that anywhere on the horse's body, but here's the thing: sometimes that's too much for a horse, and you got to back away. Like sometimes a horse is so sore, especially up at the pole, you got to put your hand up there and they're head shy. And they're head shy because of physical tension 99% of the time. It's not if you can't train them not to be head shy, then it's a physical issue. So anyways, you put your hand up there and they get wide-eyed and they pull away. If you back off till the point where their eye softens a little and you stay at that distance, then you stay there, they'll start to release the tension. This is way too much for them. So you got to back off. So I'm sure there's energy work going on. There's energy going on with everything, as you know, as a physicist. but basically what we're doing, I don't know. I don't feel energy.
Can I interrupt you for just a second? Since this is going to be a podcast for those of y'all that can't see Jim, when he's saying back off, he's literally pulling his hand away 4 inches off of the.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So he's being very literal when he says back off.
Yeah. I don't mean like back off, dude. It's like, just take your hand if you're barely touching the hair, say you're up at the pole and they're pulling away and their eyes get real wide, just back your fingers off just slowly back your fingers off till the horse's eye softens a little bit. So you might be 3 or 4 inches away or even more with your hand, or maybe even 8 inches away. But you're keeping the horse's awareness on that area in a way that he can't brace against it. That's what you're doing. So as you back away and the horse starts to soften a little in the eye or internally not bracing, all this, you're keeping his awareness on that area of discomfort in a way that he's not bracing. And if you keep his attention on it long enough without him giving him the opportunity to brace against it, then that's when the parasympathetic starts to kick in. So it's the sympathetic when they're wide-eyed and they're pulling away or they're uncomfortable. It's the sympathetic, because and if you back away till they soften a little bit visually and just wait at that distance, then the parasympathetic starts to kick in and they start to release the tension. So I don't feel any energy stuff going in my hands. I don't. And that's one reason that I didn't want to learn any energy work. Like a lot of Reiki, people that know Reiki come to our courses because that's the level that they like to work on with the horse that we're working on. So they may feel some energy going on, but I don't feel any of that energy. And I really didn't want to learn it because then I would be using Reiki and I'm supposed to be teaching the Masterson Method and how to watch visual cues. So I'm sure there's energy going on. I'm not following the energy. I'm following the visual cues from the horse.
Well, I like that because
I'm not saying there's no energy work. There is energy, some kind of energy stuff is going on, I'm sure. I don't feel it myself.
Oh, well, I like that because your method is tangible. There is something that actually occurs that everybody standing there can see.
Anybody with an eye or two and a hand, they can see this and
And I would say, like, I see more, just the more I talk with you and everything, the more applications I see with all of this stuff in a training context and connecting with the horse. I mean, like if someone walks up to me 3 months ago and said, how do you connect with a horse? I'd be like, well, let me write you a book. That's not a simple thing. And now I could say, what you need to do is go look up this guy named Jim Masterson. And if you just do his stuff for about 15 minutes, you will have a connection with that horse. And that's way simpler for me to say, because you're you're just so aware of the horse, and the horse is aware of you. And folks, I couldn't say this strongly enough. You could maybe boil all horsemanship down to simply being aware of the line between the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems. And so many people are not. They cross that thing like a bulldozer with absolutely no. That probably, if we talked about the word feel, it probably boils down to awareness of the line between the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system more than anything else. And Jim Masterson can get you aware of that line like nobody I have ever seen.
So, well, that bladder meridian video. So that's a good point you make. That's where the line is. The horse telling you when it's in the parasympathetic with the visual cues. And so, but then after you watch that, go back and train with Dan or somebody that trains like Dan trains, because then you've got that. You can apply it to riding. You can apply it to asking the horse to do whatever you're wanting to ask it to do, to get it to do. So, because it's the same nervous system training or doing the body work. It's just working on that level, like you said, of the parasympathetic and sympathetic.
Yeah, and we had talked about. Maybe I shouldn't mention this yet because it's not developed enough of an idea. But just to keep it in your head, we had talked about maybe doing some kind of a demonstration together where I'm riding the horse, but using the bit to try to trigger some of these types of releases and so forth. And obviously there are parts of the horse I couldn't affect that way, like the psoas, but I would imagine most of the cervical stuff that I could definitely.
You can get the horse to relax in the pole, the way you're doing it, it's going to affect the rest of the body too.
I absolutely. I definitely know if you add tension there, if you get a horse brace there, it's damn sure going to affect the rest of the body. So it would certainly lend itself that if you could cause release of tension there, it also is going to release tension throughout.
So you can get the horse to relax muscles under the saddle if you're using your hands and the bit properly, and your whole body. If you're what you're describing, you can get the horse to turn off muscles that are firing. So.
Well, a couple other things I wanted to be sure to get to before we run out of time. You do not just work with horses. In fact, you've just been working on a book putting these techniques into play with dogs. So you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So it works on dogs. I've only worked on dogs up to this last year, just that if I'm at a barn, and there's a dog, like there was a barn I would go to regularly, had a 3-legged dog. So this dog, and he was older, he had huge muscles build up on one side of his shoulder and his neck, and then the other side, of course not. So I would just work on the dog while I was there, just for, grins. But I realized that it works with dogs. And at first I thought, well, maybe they're a predator and the horse is a prey. So that might be, it wouldn't work on dogs, but it's the same nervous system. They just use it a little differently, So they still have the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. And if you can stay underneath, I call it underneath the bracing response, which is the sympathetic, with whatever you're doing, then the nervous system will release tension. So it still works on dogs. Now their behavior is a little different. There's other things, like they're very social animals. So you have to read through. They're always like, I love you, I love you, I love you. And they're, they want to interact with you more than the horse. The horse just stands there and is the horse. So you have to read through some of that behavior, but the same thing works if you're paying attention. It happens a little faster with dogs, but I can't pet my dogs now for the last, 5 or 10 years without watching responses. I just can't pet them without paying attention to what's going on with their eyes or ears or their body. So for quite a few years, I've been wanting to do a dog book, and my wife has been saying, you need to do a dog book, So this last year, finally did it. And it's supposed to be out in April if everything goes well, but it depends. It could be next fall, but I think it'll be out in April. And it's adapting some of these techniques that we use on horses to dogs. Another benefit of this is your relationship with your animal changes. And we've talked about this already, I think, but when your horse or your dog gets, when you learn how to read your horse or your dog, that's a huge jump, right? When in communication, you can see what's going on. But when they get that you're getting it, that's when the relationship changes. When they get that, when you're on a spot and you soften, when you're on a spot and they tell you there's something there and you soften, they get that you get it. And so that's when the relationship changes. And
I'm thinking, imagine some of these like big long-term shelters with some of these traumatized dogs that they're having trouble rehoming because they're dog aggressive or something. If someone went in there and applied these sorts of techniques, I bet in 2 weeks you got a whole different dog to deal with.
Yeah, it might. It depends on what the dog's been through. Some dogs have been really, really, I mean, traumatized, and it's really embedded in them, I think. But you can make it a change. Then a few years ago when I wanted to do more with dogs. I went to a local rescue and I said, this is what I do. Can I, practice on a couple of your dogs? And they said, sure. So I'm in this room and they let the dog in and he's of course running all over, sniffing everything. And like, he's in high gear. And so I just sit down and wait and I'd call him over and I'd pet him a little bit. Then he'd run off again. And then I'd call him over and I would search for a couple of blinks, up here behind the ear. And I get a couple of blinks and the dog would realize it's feeling something there and it would run off again. But then it would come back a little sooner. And then it'd come back pretty soon. And then pretty soon it just come back. And each time it went off and ran around, it'd come back sooner and just sit there longer. And after about 20 minutes, he was just sitting there next to me and just releasing like crazy. And so it was a process a lot more than the horse, because the horse will normally just stand there unless there's other stuff going on. Hormones, you can't control hormones in a horse, when you're working on it. That sometimes you just can't work on a mare that's marish. You just can't until she's not in heat anymore. You can't work on a stallion because he's too excited. But anyways, I think the point was the behavior of the dog is different than the horse. So it took a while for the dog to calm down, but then by the end of 20 minutes, the dog is just laying there next to me and I'm doing this on him. And then I got up to go into the office to tell them, well, I'm done now. And this dog just walked right next to me across the room and into the office, from being kind of wacko. But anyway, that's somewhat to be expected once the dog runs around and it's quiet. But this was pretty clear that the dog was feeling, whatever I was doing was making it feel better. At first it made it nervous because it was feeling stuff that it had been blocking out. But when it started to release it, then the dog was more comfortable. So that's when I realized, well, this could help people. A lot of people have dogs and their dogs are like this and their dogs don't even pay attention to them. And their dogs, they don't really have a connection. And so this could help with that as well as physical stuff.
Yes, sir. There's a lot of those little lap dogs, the little 5-pound purse monkey kind of things that could probably benefit a lot from this. Would you say the body language? I mean, obviously a horse and a dog don't have exactly the same body language. So you mentioned blinking, but like a dog's not going to lick and chew or yawn, I'm assuming.
Yeah, they will.
It is the same kind of thing.
The dog will blink, but well, horse will just, for example, you have a horse, he's just standing there and you can slowly go down the bladder meridian and then you get a blink and then you wait there and you wait 10 seconds or you wait 40 seconds and then something releases. With the dog, he might not just be standing there, he might be looking around a little. So you're still looking for the blink, but you have to read through all that other active behavior. So you're going very lightly and you get a blink and stay there. And sometimes you have the dog's moving its neck around, so you have to follow the dog. But if you stay with it long enough, then the dog will release and he'll lick and chew or he'll yawn. And so this book's going to be a little different because it's going to have little QR codes for video clips on a lot of the techniques to show you how to do it. So the same responses you're looking for, the same levels of pressure, except you're using air gap and egg yolk, and you don't really use much more than that with the dog. But the same responses, those same levels of pressure, and it's just the waiting part is a little different because dogs are a little busier. And it happens usually a little quicker with dogs. So.
Okay, that's pretty neat.
Oh, another thing with dogs, as soon as they get relaxed, they flop over and lay down. You don't normally have that with the horse, although sometimes it does.
One other thing, I should have mentioned this when we were talking about energy, but it is fairly common when you're working on a horse in a barn that like the horse in the adjacent stall might also start yawning and you kind of have this wave that goes through the barn.
Yeah.
One of the things I find interesting is that yawning in people is thought to be an empathetic response. So it's one of the ways you can test for sociopaths or psychopaths. If you're in a crowd of 10 people and you yawn 8 of them are probably going to also yawn with you. The 2 that
Yeah.
don't, you need to kind of be a little cautious of, because
Oh,
they lack
okay.
empathy. And I'm not saying, I think the sociopath, psychopath together are like 5% of the population. So
Oh, really?
that's more
Okay.
than you might think.
So you're
1 in
starting to
20
pay
people.
attention to human behavior now too, right? So
Well, I've studied human behavior far more than I have horse behavior. I don't talk about this a lot because I feel like it makes people uncomfortable. But I've been studying human body language pretty obsessively for
uh-oh.
8 or 10 years.
That's why you've been taking notes during this Zoom call. You're watching, oh wait, he did that. And we're gonna
No, but it's. I mean, my weakness when I started doing this clinician stuff was in working with the people. So I had more than enough horse knowledge. I had a difficult time connecting with the people and giving them what they need. So I started actively studying
oh, okay.
personality theory and that sort of stuff. And then I'm kind of an obsessive guy. So I kind of went down the wormhole, and, now I'm studying CIA interrogators and stuff like that, and how,
Oh, okay.
certain little,
Well, I used to work. I used to work in the oil field, roughnecking, and I was worked with this one crew for a couple of years on an offshore rig, and they were from Louisiana and from Arkansas and Texas down there, but the rig was in California. So because all the Gulf crew, that's where most of the rigs are. So the company was from Houston. So, anyways, I was roughnecking, and then we had the roustabout crew would be down on the deck, and they do roustabout stuff, and then we're up on the rig floor. But when things were slow, we kind of hang out with the roustabout crew, and we had this thing we did, my buddies and I. Of course, you're covered in mud and grease and everything, and your gloves are all greasy. So we'd stand there and chat with a couple of these roustabouts. We did this on the night shift a lot. And then we had a little cue, like Ronnie would all of a sudden he'd yawn, and then we knew one of those roustabouts was going to yawn, and we were ready. As soon as he yawned, we'd jab our finger in his mouth with the muddy glove. So that was kind of studying human behavior.
I like it. That's it.
Yeah, we could get them multiple times because those roustabouts are not too bright. No, wait, no, that's not what I meant. We could get them multiple times because it was late and they were tired. That's
Or maybe they secretly liked it a little bit, huh?
yeah. Me too.
Well, one other thing that I wanted to be sure that we talked about is that you have a feature film that has come out this year, or you're involved in, I think, a set of clinics that you did with Mark Rashid in Colorado. Would you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Mark and I do clinics together a couple times a year. His training is along the lines of the way you train, and it's along the lines of the way that we do the body work. So we do these clinics where we'll have, he used to turn away, like he said, 30 or 40 or 50% of the people that came to him with horse behavioral training issues, because he recognized there was a physical component to it. The horse couldn't comfortably do what they're asking. And a good trainer can get a horse to do anything, no matter how uncomfortable, pretty much. But he wouldn't do that. So he would send them away and say, go get this taken care of and then come back. So we started doing clinics together where we watch the horse come in, and then the rider talks about what they want to work on. We watch the horse move. Mark's got a good eye for seeing movement in the horse, and he would talk about what he's seeing. I'd talk about from my point of view, the bodywork point of view, and then he would either give the lesson or he would say, no, we have to wait till you get the bodywork done. So we'd kind of evaluate the horse. Then I would work on the horse the next day, and then the following day the horse comes back in for the lesson, so we can see we can compare how it was moving. Plus, it's really educational for the auditors because every horse has its own different set of problems. But anyways, there's a young lady in California that what we wanted to film, I think it was going to be an instructional video, but it turned out she wanted to do, it was more of a documentary. She was more interested in the people that came to the clinic and their relationship with their horses and what they were struggling with. So she made a documentary on that called A Mind Like Still Water. And so it's an interesting documentary, and it's out there. And I mean, you can buy it on our website or on Mark's website or on Amazon or anywhere, but it's really interesting because it's about the horse and about the rider's relationship with their horse.
Well, that does sound pretty interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, we at some point in the future we should get together and do like you brought up earlier, do something together like that.
Yeah, I would love to. I mean, I'll be honest. You were one of those presenters that I found very stimulating, and so like you just when you're talking and doing your presentation, I'm having ideas just firing off left and right, and I'm trying to kind of collect them and organize them and make a little sense out of them where I have a little more of a cohesive idea for you. But I've definitely been playing with some stuff since I
Okay.
got back, and
Well, we're enough on the same page that I'm happy to just get together and experiment with it. You know, it's not like it all has to
yeah,
be perfect.
absolutely. I mean, like I said, you're a fun guy. I appreciate your sense of humor and everything. I kind of almost I think we've had a great conversation here, but
It's
I
been
almost
pretty serious.
yeah, I regret that we didn't get into that part of stuff because I had a hell of a lot of fun playing with you. You're quick witted. That's part of the like sometimes people don't realize it's a joke and so forth. And I mean, when I serve one up, you serve it right back, and that's great fun for me. So
It's got to be. I can't do something if it isn't fun. I mean, I can live through some. You know, life's not always easy, but it's got to be fun, or it's not worth it to stick with something for me if it's
absolutely,
not fun. I don't know why, but it does make the job fun, and it makes people learn more easily when they're relaxed and they don't think that you're just going to make them wrong about something. And it's joking is a good way to break that tension with people if you're trying to teach them something.
for sure. I feel like that's something that's got to be there in order for someone to learn from you. They have to feel safe with you, and if
Mm-hmm.
you get them braced up, just like if you get a horse braced up, you're not going to
Mm-hmm.
accomplish what your task is supposed to be. So I try to never be condescending or anything like that with people. I mean, I've
Yeah.
one of those great little memes. I think the internet was invented just for memes, but there's a good one that floats around, and the saying on it is the master has failed more times than the beginner has tried. So, like at a clinic, there's nothing you're going to do that I haven't done 55 times already
Mm-hmm.
with a horse. I've made, I still have a lot of mistakes left to make, but I've made way more than any of the people in the clinic have ever made. So they don't need to feel like
Yeah.
they're going to be laughed at or talked down to or anything. And that's the only
That.
way you learn is to make the mistakes and learn the lesson from it. And
Yeah.
then hopefully you don't make that mistake too many more times. But
Well, that's an interesting thing. You know, I especially with horse people, because I noticed when I was a kid that they knew everything. Horse people knew everything, and and I just never wanted to be one of those guys that like you call a horse chiropractor. Oh, I know what that is. I can fix that. I just didn't ever want to be one of those guys. So it's interesting if you can let go of that need to be right, and that doesn't bother you anymore being wrong, then you're willing to try anything. So, but we have this thing. We don't want to appear to be the one that doesn't know, and especially with horses, we want to be the one that can fix the horse when nobody else can fix it. But that can be a trap, So if you can let go of the need to be right all the time, that it just makes things so much easier. Okay, well, I was wrong on that, so let's try something different. So.
well, I do have to say that's one of the oddities of being a clinician and going to these things is that you get to know some of these other people on a more personal level, and there are some absolutely tremendous egos out there that some people wouldn't realize. And you're definitely one of the more noteworthy people in the industry that I've ever really come across, and you've got to be one of the most humble people that I've come across too. I mean, you could afford to be a lot more of an asshole than you really are, Jim. Just so you
Well,
know.
it's like I told you before. I'm one of the most humble people I know. Like, there's nobody more humble than I am.
I love it.
And I dare you to find somebody. Okay, we won't go there. No, I'm just joking. But I've thought about this a little because I was expecting when I started teaching these clinics for more people to show up that were that challenge me on stuff and say, oh no, that's not right, or. But I realized they didn't show up, and I realized, well, this is so different that I didn't that there were, you know what I mean? This was so different that they were willing to listen to it. But then, you know, horse training is different because you got a lot of competition and you got a lot of trainers out there that have opinions, you know, and they have, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
So you have those people out there that already know it all. And so, but this way of doing bodywork was so different that I didn't come across people that could say that. So I didn't, it was just easier for me, I think.
I have to say, I don't know why, but I have a similar experience. And I am kind of talking about the same stuff other people, but I don't get challenged very often. I mean, people
Uh-huh.
pretty much sit there and let me talk
Yeah, well,
and
that's good. I
follow along.
think, yeah, people are changing, but also, you know, your chain of that chain of contact you talk about, you're starting on a level of subtlety that a lot of trainers like that's out of their realm. So,
My
you know,
my first deal, whenever a clinic starts, like the first exercise I put everybody through, I have them stand in a semicircle around me,
mm-hmm.
and I give them a number, and your task is to ride your horse forward that number of steps and stop on the eighth step or whatever it is.
Uh-huh.
12 or 15 riders. Would you like to know the highest number of people I've ever had that accomplished that on the first task of the clinic?
Mm-hmm.
Two.
Yeah.
You say ride your horse forward 7 steps and stop on the 7th step. I've never
Mm-hmm.
had more than 2 people that can do that.
Uh-huh.
And I do that to kind of, it started out as a way just to get a feel for where everybody is, you know, what problems
Uh-huh.
are we having and so forth. And it's a simple,
Yeah.
quick little test. But once you realize that even though you were here to learn flying lead changes, that you can't walk forward 7 steps and stop on the 7th step, it's kind of hard to argue with me after that, I think.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Right.
but,
Yeah.
but if you don't
Plus, it makes the
master it,
rider aware. It makes the rider aware of what level that they're going to be learning on too.
yeah. And why is that? And next now I want you to ride off with the right front foot first. Well, how do I do that? Well, let's talk about it, because you should be able to. That's really not that complicated of a thing. And now, can you ride a hind foot forward first?
Mm-hmm.
And where this is applicable, like if you can ride the right hind foot forward first, you can do a left lead departure in 1 step.
Mm-hmm.
And now that's pretty handy. But if you can't walk forward 7 steps and stop, you don't have a
Uh-huh.
prayer of the 1 step lead departure, you know.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Yeah.
I like to break it all down to little bitty digestible steps like that, and then you
Yeah.
learn that we were going somewhere with it. It had a reason. Wax on, wax off kind of stuff.
Yeah. Wax on, wax off. Yeah. So I would recommend anybody down in your area to come to you if you want to learn something about your horse. And don't forget to bring the car wax. If you're going to
Absolutely.
be doing wax on, wax off.
Carnauba only, please. Oh, so, well, Jim, I've taken almost 2.5 hours of your morning right now, and I really do appreciate it. It has been a pleasure getting to visit with you again, and we're definitely, I have to get together down the road and do some more stuff together. So we'll have links to your website and Facebook page and videos and all of that stuff. And I have to say, I'm going to be anxiously awaiting the dog book to come out. We got a dog I think would benefit from that stuff quite a bit. He's kind of a cranky old man, but he's only 3. So I think that'll be a good benefit to him. So,
well, I have a little short clip that I did here in the office a year or so ago with, I think it was our bookkeeper's dog or our accountant's dog, and just sitting on the floor, it's like a 2-minute thing that I'll try to find it on, I think it's on my Facebook page, and send you the link to it just so you can see. Because you know, I was talking about how their behavior is a little different while you're working on them, but the basic signs are still there, and the releases are the same.
Yeah, we'll send that to me in an email or something, and we'll put it in the show notes too. So
yeah, and we'll get you on our website too. I've been wanting to do an affiliates page, but you know, not just with anybody, but people that I do things like this with, and so that we're really on the same page. So,
well, I appreciate it. I appreciate
that'll happen. It's on the list here.
I understand. My website is a work in progress too. We've been having trouble with the subscriber side, and I've spent months, and I finally just deleted the plugin and started from scratch with a new one. So now I'm having to rebuild, but it's kind of at some point you've wasted enough time and you got to just get the dang thing fixed, you know? So anyway,
All right.
Well,
Well, I
thank you very
enjoyed it.
much.
Yeah, it has been almost 2.5 hours, but I enjoyed it.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you
Yeah.
again for coming on, and we'll be in touch down the road. So,
Okay. Thanks.
we'll see you next week for another episode of Adult Onset Horsemanship. I've been your host, Daniel Dolphin.